every time you talk on the internet, whether you make a video or write an essay, you're leaving behind a sort of artifact. For someone somewhere in the world, this will be the first time they've heard my voice. This will be, in a sense, the first time they've met me, the first time they've heard my perspective on the world. And on the other hand, some video I recorded 2 years ago, or some essay I wrote 10 years ago, somebody else could today encounter that for the first time. And that's the first they've ever heard of me. That's the first they've met me, the first time they've considered my perspective on the world. And these artifacts, they stay in circulation. They never disappear. This video is addressed to what the relationship was and what the relationship is between myself and Charles Marlowe, someone who's currently notorious as a figure in the digital vegan demimonde, in the internet subculture of people who aspire to be vegan activists, people who are vegan advocates, people who hope to see some kind of positive change connected to veganism, animal rights, ecology, ethics. There was a time when the vegan Cheetah and I were friends, and there were still videos up that refer to us as friends. There are other videos that refer to us as if we're bitter enemies. And some of you may not know this, but there are actually videos and podcasts still on the internet today complaining that Cheetah's channel is nothing but a pale imitation of mine, that his material was derivative, that he was my puppet, that his videos were so similar to mine, that he was stealing ideas from me to such an extent that he's criticized for that. And it seems unbelievable today, because today the content on his channel is so different from mine. People can't believe that we ever were friends, and people don't know what the connection between us was in the past tense. And just in the past couple of days, I had people asking me about that. It might be convenient for me to presume or pretend that I can just let the connection between Charles and I slip into obscurity, but the reality of how the internet works means that will probably never happen. And instead, there will be a miasma of misinformation. There will always be some videos saying that we're friends, some saying that we're enemies, and none really clarifying what the connection between us was, or how it was possible that for a time he seemed to imitate me, or agree with me, or resemble me so closely, and then so soon it became impossible to see that we ever had anything in common. Charles Marlowe was deeply impressed by and inspired by some videos I made on my channel a long time ago that I presumed he'd never see. One video in particular struck him, in which I was making a broader point about the type of personality that pursues fame on YouTube, the type of personality that tends to become a notorious leading figure in veganism as it exists on the internet today. And I mentioned Cheetah pretty briefly there, but I said something like, there's this new guy, the vegan Cheetah, who's rising in popularity, and he may become the next Freely or the next Durian Rider. Insightful video for its time. He may become another one of these major leaders, but we can see some of the same patterns. We can see some of the same problems with him and his personality. And I pointed out in that video that while he had some of the same characteristics of stand-up comedians or other public figures that rise to prominence, that pursue fame, that feel a need for the adoration of the crowd, same combination of vulnerability and somewhat bombastic over-the-top behavior, I pointed out at the same time he would never be able to stand for election. He would never be able to run for mayor in a small town. And running for mayor in a small town doesn't require that you have a PhD. It doesn't require you have an advanced education. It doesn't even require that you've accomplished anything great or impressive. Someone who's just been an honest shopkeeper, who's just done an honest job running the local vegetable store, the local grocery store. Can stand for mayor in a small town. Very often figures like that, pillars of the community, end up getting elected to local government to become mayors in the United States of America. And that one in particular really struck a chord with him. And he resolved at that time to turn his life around. Although in many ways he already had turned his life around, he resolved to buckle down, work harder, go back to school, enrolled in college. And he thanked me many, many times. When he first got in touch with me, which was a few months later, he thanked me profusely for the way in which I had influenced his life, that I had inspired him. Not just in that video. He went on to watch every single video on my channel. He was deeply impressed by the political perspective I brought to it. He was deeply impressed by the type of aspiration, both for a better future for humanity and for a better future for us individually as vegans. And he decided that he had to remake himself into an educated professional who could represent veganism well, who could represent himself well, who could have the type of respectability he'd been lacking his whole life, as someone who'd done odd jobs, as someone who'd been a waiter, as someone who'd been a drug addict, as someone who'd been a convict. So partly he was responding to a message that was in my videos, and partly I think it's safe to say my videos just happened to trigger a set of insecurities, a set of dissatisfaction he had with the life he'd been living. And he took that and channeled it into an aspiration to really become a better person, partly through education, partly through desire to have a meaningful career in journalism. And I got to see some good things come out of that in a pretty short time. You know, even that one example I gave of him giving a monologue for several hours, talking about the differences between real conditions on small farms and the propaganda image that vegans display, basically tending to work with the worst case scenarios on certain types of factory farms, slaughterhouses, etc. His whole approach to that really was journalistic. Even though he was a vegan, even though it was convenient for him to believe that propaganda, he was doing original research and bringing an original perspective and asking tough questions. And at that time he was communicating with other people, other vegans who were interested in those same questions, and picking up on their research. At that time it was easy to see a lot of good in the man. It was easy to see hope for the future. And it was easy to see what he was doing as being on an upward trajectory. It's easy to forget. It's easy to forget why so many of us had high hopes for the guy and were encouraging the guy. It's easy to forget why so many of us made a video welcoming him back and encouraging him when he got out of rehab for his drug addiction. Why so many of us collaborated to make a video encouraging him when his channel was briefly taken down, was briefly blocked on YouTube. Some months later it was reinstated. So many of us just wanted him to succeed. And I'm sure that's because each of us has some moment like that that stays with us. Whether or not, you know, for me, it was that particular day, that lecture that he gave that carried on while I went and did my laundry and came back. For those of us who saw him during that period when he was really positively motivated, I'm sure each of us has different memories of him doing something sincere and positive, trying to contribute to meaningful discussions that were going on within veganism at the time, before he got into a downward spiral that, from my perspective, is never going to end. So yeah, there is a connection between Cheetah and myself. I remember him writing to me and not just thanking me for the profound effect that had on his life, but him questioning whether or not there was some spiritual meaning to this, whether or not this was the design of the universe. That was before his mother had died, when he had a lot more of that kind of spiritual talk on his channel. I I can remember him writing to me saying, this must all mean something. This must be in the stars. You know, this must reflect some kind of great design, that he had managed to get in touch with me, and that I had managed to make these videos that sparked him to take on this new direction, that inspired him to try to become a better person, to pursue a career as a journalist, to turn his life around at a time when, from one perspective, he already had turned his life around. He'd already gone from being a drug addict to being a bodybuilder, from a meat eater to a vegan. But when he met me on the internet, he took on a different set of horizons, both in terms of professional accomplishment, in terms of educational accomplishment, and in terms of a more ambitious political view of what veganism could be in his life, in his community. That activism was something much more than coming on the internet and selling a diet book, or glamorizing a lifestyle, or making call-out videos or comedy videos. The period he had when he was so inspired by the material on my channel, and the period, somewhat longer period, when he and I were friends, that was the connection between us. And where it stands today, you can watch my more recent video, my final judgment of the vegan cheetah. He's someone I never want to speak to again.